May 12th is Election Day in British Columbia. This is perhaps the most important election BC has ever faced. In this election, we stand to lose everything that makes BC special. We may not realize it, but British Columbia is one of the wealthiest places in the world. However, if Gordon Campbell's Liberal government wins in the May 12th election, we could lose it all. BC needs your help on voting day. Gordon Campbell's Liberal government is selling out British Columbia's most valuable resources to some of the world's largest corporations. These are resources that sustain our quality of life, our communities, and our economies. If the Liberals are elected back into power on May 12th, it could change the face of beautiful British Columbia forever. Your vote can stop them. For 30 years, British Columbia has maintained a moratorium on oil and gas development and oil tanker traffic, protecting our living coast, our tourism industry, and our wild fisheries from major oil spills. The Liberal government plans to change all of that. They are disregarding the 30-year moratorium and actively pursuing oil and gas development on our coast, including inshore oil rigs and allowing some of the world's largest crude oil tankers to pass through our narrow inlets, threatening our entire coastal ecosystem and wild fisheries. The current plan is to build a pipeline from the Alberta tar sands to the coast of BC, shipping more than half of Alberta's toxic crude oil along our coastline. This will allow the Alberta tar sands, which are already the largest single source of carbon emissions in Canada, to double their production of the world's dirtiest oil by millions of barrels every week. You might want to ask Gordon Campbell, is this in line with reducing carbon emissions? Experts predict that if we allow these oil tankers on our coast, we could expect a major oil spill within 5 to 10 years. One drunk captain was all it took. In 1989, an oil tanker named the Exxon Valdez ran aground in Prince William Sound, Alaska, spilling 40 million liters of crude oil into the ocean, contaminating over 1,000 miles of coastline. Thousands of people worked day and night in an attempt to clean up the oil, but in the end, they were only able to recover 3%. The oil killed untold numbers of birds, fish, and marine mammals, destroying local fisheries, economies, and communities. Overnight, their way of life changed forever. 20 years later, there is still toxic oil in the beaches in Prince William Sound, and many of the fisheries have never recovered. Exxon refused to pay damages to these communities. Many people lost their livelihood. Meanwhile, Exxon has become the richest corporation in the world. Now, Gordon Campbell is inviting them to British Columbia. BC's wild salmon. They support an important commercial fishery, a world-famous sports fishing industry, and some of the world's most majestic wildlife, drawing thousands of tourists from around the globe, bringing billions of dollars into the BC economy every year. Wild salmon also provide hundreds of communities and thousands of people with food security, continuing an age-old tradition of sustaining themselves on wild salmon. To many, the wild salmon represents survival. In the past several years, scientists have discovered that sea lice and disease from industrial fish farming is severely impacting our wild salmon, including the Fraser River sockeye, the largest salmon run in Canada. This, however, is not a new phenomenon. Other places in the world have already lost their wild fisheries due to lice from fish farms. Yet the Liberal government continues to deny there is a problem, despite the fact that this science has been published in the world's top scientific journals. The Liberals continue to expand the fish farming industry into our most important wild salmon areas. If we lose wild salmon, we also lose everything that depends on them. We can save our wild salmon by voting in this election. In 2003, the Liberal government implemented the BC Energy Plan, putting the rights to virtually every river that can make power up for sale to private companies. Without consulting the public, the Liberals have been giving away the rights to our rivers for the profit of private corporations. Our rivers, our most valuable public resource. They supply our fish, our wildlife, our recreation, our fresh water, our power, and our self-sufficiency. The Liberals are giving them away at rock-bottom prices. In what is being called a gold rush, claims on hundreds of rivers across BC are being staked by private power companies. These projects are not the green power they claim to be. In most cases, these projects are large industrial operations where rivers are dammed and diverted with unknown consequences for fish stocks, sometimes with hundreds of kilometers of networking roads and transmission lines through many of our remaining wilderness areas. There is a way to do green hydro development, but this is not it. Many of these rivers are in some of our last expanses of intact wilderness, with valuable salmon runs, grizzly bear habitat, and tourism operations. These valuable resources will be impacted if these industrial private power projects are allowed to go ahead. Under Gordon Campbell, this would happen to rivers across British Columbia, with no consideration for cumulative impacts. Under NAFTA, the rights of corporations to make money could override environmental concerns and the future needs of British Columbians. Besides losing control of our rivers, the Liberals plan to lock us into a contract where we must buy our hydropower from these companies at much higher rates for decades to come. These companies stand to profit billions of dollars at our expense and own the rights to our rivers. We can save our rivers in this election. Make no mistake, the Liberals are not working for you. They're working for the interest of big business, selling out BC as quickly as possible. If they win, it could mean saying goodbye to our wild rivers, a clean living coastline, wild salmon, the entire web of life that relies on wild salmon, and jobs that rely on a clean, healthy environment, like commercial fisheries, ecotourism, and sports fishing. Don't let Gordon Campbell sell out what belongs to you. The NDP may not be perfect, but in this election, they are the best chance that we have of saving our province. The NDP support a moratorium on oil tankers on our coast, saving our coastline from devastating oil spills, moving salmon farms to closed containment systems, protecting our wild salmon from lice and disease from fish farms, a moratorium on the sale of our rivers to private companies, keeping BC rivers in the hands of British Columbians. The problem is, currently in BC, we have a first-past-the-post election system. By voting Green in this election, you run the risk of splitting the vote, allowing the Liberals back into office to complete their agenda of selling out BC. In this election, we need to vote to keep our resources in the hands of British Columbians. On May 12th, make your vote count.